The first thing Marcus Reed noticed that morning was the silence. Not the calm kind, but the tight, polished quiet that lived in the glass halls of Virix and Global, where voices softened automatically and laughter felt out of place. The headquarters rose like a monument of steel and confidence in downtown Chicago, 42 floors of ambition owned and ruled by people who never had to wonder whether they belonged there. Marcus adjusted his tie in the reflection of the elevator doors. It was borrowed. Everything he wore was borrowed, thrifted, carefully chosen to look like he had always known how to stand in rooms like this. He was 22, a first-generation college graduate, and the first in his family to ever step foot inside a Fortune 500 company, except no one here knew that, and no one had asked. The elevator chimed softly on the 37th floor. "Confidence," Marcus whispered to himself as he stepped out. "Just be confident." He was an intern, unpaid, technically. A learning opportunity, they had called it. 3 months of 12-hour days, coffee runs, data cleaning, and quiet note-taking in meetings where no one looked at him long enough to remember his name. Still, Marcus treated every task like it mattered. Because to him, it did. The open-plan office stretched wide, all white desks and muted greys, broken only by floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city like a painting. People moved with purpose, heels clicking, laptops tucked under arms, voices low and efficient. Marcus walked to his desk near the back, always the back, logged in, and pulled up the financial model he'd been refining for weeks. It was good work. He knew that. He had stayed up nights double-checking formulas, running simulations, correcting inefficiencies no one else had noticed because no one else had bothered. He hadn't told anyone. He was waiting for the right moment. That moment, he believed, would be the executive strategy meeting scheduled for 10 a.m. At 9:47, an email popped into his inbox. From Executive Office. Subject: Strategy Meeting, Conference Room. A message: Intern Marcus Reed to attend and provide support. Marcus's heart jumped. He read it twice to be sure. Attend, not just take notes afterward. Attend. Conference Room. A was sacred territory. That's where the CEO sat, where decisions were made that moved markets and ruined competitors. Marcus stood, smoothed his jacket and walked toward the glass-walled room, feeling eyes follow him in ways he had learned to recognize. Quick glances, subtle pauses, expressions that said, "Who is he?" Inside, the room buzzed with quiet authority. Executives filled leather chairs around a long walnut table, tablets, notepads, bottled water lined up with geometric precision. At the head sat Richard Holden, the CEO. Holden was exactly what Marcus expected. Mid-50s, silver at the temples, tailored navy suit, the kind of man whose voice never wavered because it had never been challenged. He was smiling when Marcus entered, but it was a thin smile, already fading. Marcus took a seat near the end, opened his notebook, and waited. The meeting began smoothly. Quarterly forecasts, market expansion, cost reductions. Marcus followed closely, occasionally jotting notes. Then the discussion turned to the Northside redevelopment project, the one Marcus had been assigned to assist with. Holden frowned at the projected figures. "These numbers don't make sense," he said sharply. "We're leaking value somewhere." Silence followed. Executives shifted. One of the senior analysts cleared his throat but said nothing. Marcus hesitated. His pulse hammered. He knew where the issue was. He had fixed it in his model. Quietly, carefully. He raised his hand slightly. Not high, not interrupting, just enough. "Yes," Holden said, eyes flicking toward him, then narrowing when he realized who had spoken. Marcus stood. "Sir, if I may, the margin loss appears tied to outdated vendor assumptions. I ran an adjusted model last night. If we revise the inputs, projected losses drop by 12%. The room froze. Then came the laugh. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp, dismissive, and unmistakably cruel. Holden leaned back in his chair, smiling now, not kindly. "And you are?" "Marcus Reed, sir. Intern." A few executives exchanged glances. Someone smirked. Holden tilted his head. "An intern," he repeated, as if tasting the word. "So you're telling me my senior team missed something you caught?" While fetching coffee, a ripple of restrained laughter moved around the table. Marcus felt heat crawl up his neck, but he kept his voice steady. "I didn't fetch coffee, sir. I was assigned to the model." Holden's smile vanished. "Careful," he said. "Tone matters in this room." Marcus swallowed. "I apologize. I only meant—" "You meant to correct people who've been doing this longer than you've been alive," Holden cut in. He stood now, hands resting on the table, eyes locked on Marcus. "Let me give you some advice. You're here to observe, not to speak, especially when you don't understand the full picture." The words hit harder because of how casually they were delivered. Marcus nodded once. "Understood, sir." "Good," Holden said. Then, louder, for the room, "This is what happens when we let diversity quotas replace experience." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Marcus sat down slowly. His hands trembled, but he forced them still. No one spoke up. No one met his eyes. The meeting moved on as if nothing had happened, but in the far back corner of the room, partially obscured by a frosted glass divider, a man stood quietly, unnoticed by almost everyone. He had arrived early. He had heard everything. And he was watching Marcus Reed very carefully. The elevator doors slid open on the 27th floor with a muted chime, and Elijah Carter stepped out, shoulders squared despite the knot tightening in his stomach. He had replayed the scene from the morning a dozen times already. The way the laughter had rippled across the open office, the way the CEO's voice had carried without effort, sharp and amused as if humiliation were a harmless joke. Elijah adjusted the thin strap of his messenger bag and walked toward his desk, aware of the sudden quiet that followed him like a shadow. People looked away quickly. Some pretended to type. Others stared at their screens with exaggerated focus. No one said his name. By mid-morning, an email arrived marked mandatory. All interns were required to attend a professional conduct review in Conference Room A. Elijah read the message twice, his jaw tightening. He knew what it meant, or rather, who it meant. Conference Room A was all glass and chrome, a space designed to intimidate without raising its voice. The interns filed in and took their seats around the long table, hands folded, backs straight. At the head sat Richard Hale, the CEO, immaculate in a tailored navy suit, silver hair combed back like a crown. He smiled, slow and confident, as if he were about to deliver a gift rather than a lesson. "Let's talk about expectations," Hale began, folding his hands. "This company values excellence, precision, knowing your place in the process." Elijah felt the words land like stones. Hale's eyes drifted, casually, until they found him. "Elijah, was it?" he said, though he had known his name perfectly well when he mocked it earlier. "Yes, sir." Hale leaned back. "This morning you spoke up during a board walkthrough, corrected one of my statements. I clarified a data point, sir. The numbers on the Asia-Pacific forecast." Hale raised a hand, silencing him. "That's not your role. Interns observe. They learn. They don't interrupt leadership." A few interns shifted uncomfortably. "Confidence is admirable," Hale continued, "but overconfidence, that's dangerous, especially when it's not backed by experience." Elijah felt heat rise in his face, but he kept his voice steady. "The numbers were incorrect. I thought accuracy mattered." A flicker crossed Hale's face, annoyance, quickly masked by a chuckle. "Idealism," he said. "We'll beat that out of you eventually." A couple of nervous laughs followed. Elijah didn't join them. "Let this be a reminder," Hale concluded, standing. "Speak when spoken to." The meeting ended just as abruptly as it had begun. As interns filed out, avoiding Elijah's eyes, he remained seated for a moment, hands clenched beneath the table. He had come here believing merit mattered. That hard work could speak louder than bias. But the room still echoed with Hale's laughter, and it told a different story. Back at his desk, Elijah opened the spreadsheet he had been working on since before dawn. He had triple-checked the figures. He knew he was right. The forecast Hale had presented to the board was flawed, optimistic to the point of negligence, and buried in the company's shared drive was proof. Raw data from a subsidiary Hale had quietly ignored. Elijah hesitated. Speaking up again could end his internship. Staying silent could cost the company millions and validate everything Hale believed about him. Across the floor, the office hummed with routine. Phones rang, printers whirred. Life went on as if nothing had happened. But from the back of the room, behind a half-closed office door, someone had been watching the entire morning unfold. Someone who hadn't laughed. Someone who had noticed the data discrepancy weeks ago and wondered who, exactly, would have the courage to say something. Elijah took a breath, opened a new document, and began to write. The room went quiet in a way Daniel had never felt before. Not the awkward silence of embarrassment, but a heavy, listening stillness. Every executive eye drifted from the frozen projection screen to the back of the auditorium where the voice had come from. A woman stood up slowly from the last row. She was tall, dressed simply in a dark blazer, her grey hair pulled back with precision. She didn't rush. She didn't raise her voice, yet something about the way she stood made even the CEO straighten instinctively. "Turn the sound back on," she said calmly. Marcus Hale, the CEO, blinked. "I'm sorry, who are—" "I said," the woman repeated, still calm. "Turn the sound back on." The head of IT hesitated only a second before complying. The video resumed. This time, the audio filled the room. Marcus's voice echoed from the speakers, sharp and mocking. "Let's be honest, Daniel. This internship is a stretch for someone like you. We value diversity, of course, but you need to know your place here." A low murmur rippled through the audience. The woman began walking down the aisle as the video continued, Marcus interrupting Daniel, laughing when Daniel tried to explain his data model, dismissing his ideas without review. Every step she took felt deliberate, as if she were walking through evidence rather than carpet. Daniel's hands were clenched so tightly his nails dug into his palms. He had lived this moment already. Hearing it again, amplified, public, felt unreal. The video ended. The woman stopped beside Daniel. "Thank you," she said to him quietly. Then she turned to face Marcus. "My name is Evelyn Carter," she said, chairwoman of the board. The colour drained from Marcus's face. You usually notify us before attending internal meetings," he stammered. "I didn't want advance preparation," Evelyn replied. "I wanted honesty." She gestured toward Daniel. "This young man's mother and I were law partners for 15 years. When she passed, I promised her I would watch over her son, not hand him anything, not protect him from failure, but ensure he was judged fairly." The room was completely silent now. "I've been watching," Evelyn continued, "quietly, for 6 months. She nodded to the screen again. "That presentation you dismissed, independent analysts rated it as the strongest proposal in this quarter. The data optimization you called confusing, it reduced processing costs by 12% in pilot testing." Marcus opened his mouth. No sound came out. Evelyn's gaze hardened. "What concerns me is not incompetence. It is arrogance and prejudice disguised as leadership." She turned to the executive seated nearby. "You laughed with him. You stayed silent. That silence is complicity." Then she looked back at Daniel. "Daniel Brooks," she said, her voice softening. "Your internship ends today." Daniel's chest tightened. "And your full-time position begins tomorrow," she added, "with a promotion offer pending board review." A sharp intake of breath swept through the room. Evelyn turned back to Marcus. "As for you, Mr. Hale, your resignation will be submitted before close of business." Security stepped forward, not aggressively, but firmly. Marcus looked around, desperate, humiliated, exposed. For the first time, he understood what it felt like to be powerless in a room that had once belonged to him. Daniel remained seated, stunned. Evelyn leaned down slightly. "You stayed quiet not because you were weak," she said, "but because you were strong enough to wait for truth to speak louder than noise." Daniel stood. The room, without instruction, began to applaud. Not for spectacle, not for punishment, but for justice. The room did not erupt the way Daniel had imagined. There was no shouting, no dramatic gasp from the crowd. Instead, a heavy silence settled over the auditorium, thick and suffocating, as if everyone was afraid to breathe the wrong way. All eyes were still fixed on the frozen image on the screen behind the CEO. Marcus leaning forward, his face twisted with irritation, his voice caught mid-sentence as he delivered what now sounded unmistakably like cruelty. Marcus finally turned around. For the first time since stepping onto the stage, his confidence faltered. The practiced smile drained from his face as he stared at the screen, then at the audience, then back again. He opened his mouth, closed it, and swallowed hard. The microphone picked up the sound. This is completely out of context," he said quickly, forcing a short laugh. Anyone who's managed people knows how moments get misinterpreted. A few nervous chuckles answered him. Most people stayed silent. Daniel felt his heart pounding, but he didn't look away. He stood still at the back of the room, hands at his sides, shoulders squared. For years, he had learned how to disappear when white eyes slid past him, how to make himself small so he wouldn't be seen as threatening or difficult. Now he did the opposite. He let himself be visible. The woman who had stopped the video, Evelyn, stepped forward into the light. Her presence alone shifted the room. She was calm, composed, her expression unreadable. "Context is exactly why we're here," she said evenly. "Please continue the footage." The video resumed. Marcus's voice filled the room again, clearer now, harder to ignore. "You people always think you deserve more than you've earned," he said on screen. "Be grateful you're even here. Interns like you are replaceable." A low murmur rippled through the audience. Daniel felt a familiar sting behind his eyes, but this time it wasn't humiliation. It was something sharper, heavier. Validation. Proof. He remembered standing in that office, feeling his face burn while Marcus leaned back in his chair, casual and untouchable. He remembered how he'd gone home that night and rehearsed quitting in his head, then erased the thought because he needed the job. On the screen, the video ended. Evelyn turned to the audience. "This intern," she said, gesturing toward Daniel, "filed a complaint that was dismissed internally within 48 hours. No interviews, no review, no follow-up." She paused, letting that sink in. He was told he was misunderstanding corporate tone. Marcus stepped forward again, his voice tight. "With all due respect, this is not the place for internal HR matters." "This is exactly the place," Evelyn replied. "Because this company prides itself on diversity statements that sound good on paper while allowing behavior like this behind closed doors." She looked directly at Marcus now. "And because you forgot one critical detail." The room leaned forward as one. "You forgot who your largest silent shareholder is." A wave of whispers broke out. Marcus's face went pale. Evelyn turned and looked straight at Daniel for the first time. Her expression softened, just slightly. "Daniel, would you come forward?" Every step down the aisle felt unreal. Daniel could feel the eyes on him, some curious, some shocked, some suddenly ashamed. He climbed the steps onto the stage, his legs steady despite the storm inside him. Evelyn handed him a folder. "Your grandfather built this company with 3 other men," she said, loud enough for the room to hear. "He stepped away quietly decades ago, leaving his shares untouched. Those shares are now yours." The silence shattered. Daniel looked down at the folder, then back up. "I didn't come here for revenge," he said, his voice calm but firm. I came here because I was tired of being invisible. Tired of being spoken to like I didn't belong. He looked at Marcus. I did the work. I earned my place, and I won't apologize for expecting respect. Marcus said nothing. He couldn't. For the first time in his life, Daniel felt the balance shift, not because someone had saved him, but because the truth had finally been allowed to stand in the open.